you. Good morning, everyone. It's 7:30, and I'd like to call to order the Concord Municipal Light Board for April 13th, 22nd. In terms of today's agenda, you've all got the materials. We had several sets of advanced materials sent out to the board, and we will cover each of those as we get to agenda items. First on the agenda, our next meeting is scheduled for May. I'm going to apologize. I have no meeting materials in front of me right now, so I'm going to apologize because I'm at my work location. Apologize for that. But our next meeting is scheduled for a month from today. I assume people do not have any concerns with that particular meeting date, which is
May 11th.
It's May 11th, right? Any concerns from the board for that meeting?
Yes, Wendy, you want me to attend the May meeting?
Yes, I do. So, Gordon, I know you're asking because on May 1st is town meeting. We have a change of the board coming, but I believe that change in board would become effective in June. So to that point, I would like you to join us in May for that meeting. And then that would probably be your last meeting. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay.
Wendy, are you going to meet in April 27th as you discussed?
Right, so that's where I was going. So I was going to just reflect that in our, actually, you know what I was going to ask the board was whether we could have an additional meeting on April 27th. As we've been planning the agenda for today, our agenda has a very large agenda on rates because we're committing ourselves to having some deep dive discussions on rates so that we're prepared at the end of the year to sort of introduce and have a rate hearing on new rates. It's important that we spend some dedicated time to those topics, but because we're dedicating some dedicated time in our agendas, we're not getting through all the items that we need to discuss as a board. In particular, we said that we would have a review of the power cost adjustment. We wanted to look at the rec strategy. We likely need to look at board goals for next year, et cetera. So there's a lot of agenda items that I would actually like to cover in an ad hoc meeting, and wanted to look to see if the board would be willing to have an additional meeting on the 27th. And if it's 7:30 to 9, if that's better for people, just want to get a sense of the board, whether you'd be open to that. And also, Pam, you had raised the topic of reviewing the board's charter. That would be a topic that we would talk about that at that time too.
That's great. Great. I'm available.
Okay.
As am I.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that'd be great. Also on that agenda will be a slate of officers presented that I'll present the slate of officers, and then we will have any discussion in the May meeting and vote that the new slate of officers in to be effective in June. So, all right, so that's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. So we'll officially meet on April 27th, 7:30. That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it. So moving on in the agenda, we have a set of minutes that were reviewed and distributed for December 29th. I don't know if there were additional comments on those minutes. No. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I move that. Go ahead.
Pam first, or is there a second?
Second.
Alice. Okay, so we'll do a roll call. Pam?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
Wendy? Yes. All right. Thank you all. So we're making progress on the minutes, and I understand Karen has the January minutes out, so we're making progress, and I appreciate us making an effort to do that. So thank you all for that. All right, so moving on to sort of the chair's report, I wanted to just reflect that in our last meeting, we've had some great discussions in the last couple months, all very deliberate, focused on commitments that we as a board made to review our strategy. And I think we had a good discussion on that. We ended our last meeting talking about Article 38, which we approved and voted affirmative action on. I wanted, at this point though, I will plan to prepare minutes for the town meeting for that vote. As you recall, there was some discussion around some concerns around implementing that plan as stated in the article. I wanted to get the board's input on any talking points that they want to share as part of those comments. I personally believe that the board, as we all know, has a lot on our plate by the end of the year. We talked about how feasible it would be to get that report done, and we said additional resources would likely be needed. But resources means money. Which we did not, which probably means there's an impact to our bottom line. So I feel like there's some risk in completing that, because there's money involved potentially. We haven't talked about how to get that plan done, but also the feasibility of getting it done. So as we think about comments for town meeting, I think we all have an interest in pursuing the article, putting a plan together. But I wonder if there are some comments that we might want to make as part of our statement. I think we're certainly going to make a good faith effort to build that plan, but I also think there's some risks in achieving it by the end of the year. And so want to just open this up to the board for any particular talking points you feel should be included in those comments to town meeting. People have thoughts?
As I mentioned in the previous meeting, I do think the deadline of before town meeting next year, I think was the deadline in the article.
No, it was year end. It was year end 22,
okay.
Right? That's, yeah. Yep.
So year end 22 is coming upon us pretty quick.
Yep.
But I would like to see this completed by mid-year next year, so June-ish. I don't want to, leave an open-ended, no deadline. It gets ignored, and then suddenly someone says, "Where is it?" And we're in 2024 or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the deadline's close. I think it's going to take some effort, and resources is. I think staff time is going to be more pressing than the cost. I think, staff is asked to do a lot. And this is going to be something else with a deadline that's rather soon. So those are my concerns. I think it's as I stated before, it's a worthwhile thing to do.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay.
I think it just
Alice?
speaks for itself. Oh, I'm sorry. Right.
Sorry, Alice, you raised your hand, sorry.
Yeah.
Alice.
So what I on the question of resources, I don't know that it's necessarily financial. The way I'm looking at a possible way to achieve the goals of Article 38 would be to establish a committee that would help us. That would be, a subcommittee, or not necessarily of board members, but other people who would help us review the components of a plan. And I honestly have a different view of what a plan looks like. And I just want to say what I think that this is. There is a goal that was set. I understand that the light plant did not agree necessarily with how that goal got set, but given the fact that there is a goal, we should identify all the steps it would take if we were to achieve that goal in whatever time frame that article says. And a lot of that may lead to the need for public engagement, perhaps a vote at town meeting, perhaps a sense of the board as this goes ahead. So there are steps that happen along the way. What I heard in that article was a plea for transparency. And I think that is what I'd like to address in this plan. Not necessarily we shall do X, Y, and Z to achieve this goal, but identify all the steps that would have to take place for that goal to be achieved, and let those decisions evolve over time with an engaged public.
I like your idea of a subcommittee, Alice.
Thanks, Alice. I think that's an important clarification. I know you tried to make that point in our last discussion, and my vote of dissent was a little because I was being more literal in what a plan really represents, and I felt it really needed a detailed plan with implementation, and because it called for a schedule, I was concerned. So I appreciate your comments, and I certainly support that. Pam, do you have additional comments?
Briefly, I just think that the vote speaks for itself, and I don't think we need to go on and on with any kind of commenting about concerns or fears. I think, and I also think that what Alice said was, as to what a plan is, which you could spend months, debating. I think she's got the right idea, just a framework that is transparent and does not need to be a lot of heavy lifting.
Okay, Gordon, do you have any additional thoughts?
I thought that that maybe we could ask town meeting to change the expectations to, as Brian said, maybe a little bit further into next year. And I just make the observation too, we get to write the plan. So if it turns out that it really doesn't make sense for solar in town, then that could be in the plan. I'm not saying that that's the outcome I'm asking for. I'm just saying that, look, it's an opportunity to be transparent in our decision making.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the best outcome for this report is a community understanding of the reality of adopting large amounts of solar and the barriers that may be, inherent in doing so. I think getting everybody in the community on the same page should be the goal.
Okay. That's great feedback. I really appreciate that. So I will weave that. I do think that we need to make a statement because some people will be very literal about the statement of the article that says there must be a report with a schedule reported at the end of the year. So I think it's important that we suggest that that we are in support of the article and our approach to that. So I will craft some statements and I will circulate that to members of the board for further feedback. So thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. All right, with that, I think that's what I had for today. I will move us on to our next agenda item. And Dave, do you want to proceed with the director's report?
Sure. So CMLP is now offering $10,000 for whole home air source heat pump rebates and $1,250 per ton for partial home rebates for Concord households that switch from oil, propane, electric resistance, ATS to heat pumps in 22. So we're excited about that. I gave you some feedback that we had from a resident in the report, which was positive. Also, at the last meeting we reported on the total number of EVs in town, and that was 581. That was the most up-to-date figure we had at the time. It included all the additions from 2021, but none of the subtraction. So some folks have gotten rid of EVs, and the net for the beginning of 22 is 545 EVs in town. It's an increase of 75 from earlier in 2021. So it's a very positive movement on electric vehicles. On the middle school project, we did receive the proposal from Solar Design Associates earlier this week. They put together a proposal that had, it's a 6-phase process. The first phase we already completed, that was the schematic design. The next 2 phases, phase 2 includes design development. Phase 3 is 100% construction documents. Phase 4 is bidding, evaluation, contractor selection. Phase 5 is construction period support, and phase 6 is system commissioning. And proposal they have in front of us is just under $97,000. In the report, I did mention that that's something that we didn't budget for. So just want to keep that in mind, that cost would be spread over a couple of years, I think, based on what I'm seeing in terms of the 6-phase process. The smart metering project is still moving along. The review team have continued to work on preparation for vendor presentation / interviews. Those are scheduled for next week on April 19th, 20th, and 21st. Each vendor's got about 2 hours with the team for presentation and Q&A. So we're excited to get to that phase of the project. And we did have a meeting with NISC to kind of review the 3 vendors that we have, just to see what kind of feedback they had on their experiences with them. So that project is moving along. Again, be happy when we're done with next week, and the team will get together and hopefully narrow it down to a finalist and see if we can't negotiate a contract. So I also sent out the arrears report that we do. That gets done usually but before the moratorium and after the moratorium for shut-off. So I included the November numbers just so you guys would have an idea where we were when the winter moratorium was put in place, and then where we are now. And the report shows that the amount due is just over 866,000. And the past due amount is just over 521,000. So sounds like a large number. It is the total amount due is about $100,000 less than the November report. Collections will commence and shutoffs will start April 26th. And as a reminder to the board, the shutoffs start with the customers 90 days past due. So the customers that are 90 days past due, hopefully we can work out a payment plan with them or get them to pay up. But that amount due is about just over $58,000. So we'll start with that piece and then we'll move on. And hopefully we don't have to shut anyone off. And, the customer service team does a good job of working through payment plans and things of that with the customers. So I'm hoping we have success like we normally do. And with that, that's my report. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.
Dave, that's great. And so maybe in our April meeting for the school project, I don't know what the timelines are for those phases, but maybe we could review some of that in more detail. In part, I'm concerned about making sure that we think about funding for that project and when we would expect. I assume that we have some article that might need to be developed for funding.
Yeah,
so
funding's
just
going to
getting
be
more.
Funding's going to be a main issue that you guys are going to need to talk about.
Right.
And we're not quite there yet, but
Right.
It is going to be expensive and we're going to have to figure it out.
Right. There was also at the public hearing some reference to a potential special town meeting in the fall. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but we can follow up on that. But that all the more reason just to understand that timeline sooner than later.
Quick question. So the heat pump rebate, it's wonderful. The whole house, big rebate, get people to do the full switch. I wanted to ask a question about the air conditioner rebates that Concord Light offers. For a long time, we've offered a rebate based on the efficiency of an air conditioning unit. Could we consider in a future meeting changing that from getting rid of the AC rebate and replacing it with a heat pump rebate, such that when people put in central air or replace their existing compressor, that they go to a heat pump so that they can still have a furnace, but they'll have this heat pump available to them, and instead of pushing just AC units that only are single direction.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're going to need to look at, Brian.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, what I'm expecting is based on the numbers we're coming back, we're going to be over budget on heat pump rebates for this year,
Yep.
which is a good problem to have, but
Right.
That's what I'm expecting.
Yep. Great. Thanks. Alice?
I have two questions. First, I want to just pick up on what Dave just said about the heat pump rebates. Do we have a budget for how much we are going to provide for rebates for heat pumps for the next year?
Yeah, it's in the budget
Yep.
for calendar year 2022. And I think as we move into 23, we're going to realize that we're going to have to budget some more for that. And I think Brian's point to looking at the other rebates and figuring out funding and what we get rid of is going to be a key factor. Because, if you look at history of rebates, and solar is a great one where we, committed X amount and well surpass what we budgeted. The same thing is likely to happen with heat pumps, and that would impact the bottom line, and we could have a negative return. So we need to look at all of that as we move forward. So very, very good point.
Can you just remind me what that budget number is, without having to read through the whole book? How much are we setting aside for heat pump rebates, just so we know what the context is?
Yeah, I don't have that on the
Remember
top.
offhand? Yeah.
I'd have to
Maybe,
go on the, get the
maybe
budget.
Matt could look that
I-
up while we're, yeah.
This is Jan.
Oh.
Jan. I
Oh.
know the number if you'd like it.
Sure.
Yeah, great.
Okay. We budgeted $123,000 for 2022. And I just also want $123,000 for air source heat pump rebate for 2022. I believe we also budgeted a small amount for ground source as well, and that is separate. I can look that up. The other thing that I wanted to say was that we have not offered rebates for air conditioning only for a number of years. We no longer do that.
Oh, I apologize then. I thought that rebate was still in place. Apparently it's not.
It
Thank
is
you.
not.
No, but Brian, your point is still applicable to all the other rebates.
Right.
We can look at them all.
And so Dave, just in terms of thinking that out for the next budget, that time frame is sort of September, October-ish that we need to talk about that as a board, assuming,
Well, we get going on the budget in September, October.
Right.
And really get into the nuts and bolts of it in November.
Right.
So, yeah, I think after summer, we're gonna need an agenda item for the
Discussion.
board to review the rebates and for us to, have a healthy discussion with myself and staff on where we're going with rebates and what we're looking at, so that when we, get the budget finalized, we are going in the direction we want to and that we need to, because we only have so much funding.
Great. Thanks, Dave. I know Dave, we've talked about sort of slating out for the whole rest of the year, all the discussions that need to occur as it relates to REITs and budget. So I'll just add this to that list. Okay. Alice, you had another question?
Yeah, I do. I have a second question. It's in regards to the middle school project. I think the proposal is a good rough start of the management side of how we make decisions about the solar at the middle school. It seems that $96,000 or $97,000 is what, maybe 1% of the total cost of the whole project. It seems pretty reasonable to me, if I've done that little math right. So the question I have is, at what point does the board need to make decisions about the middle school project, size, scope? I know that there was a presentation, some numbers months ago about the size component. It's anywhere so far. I've seen numbers from 1.5 megawatts of power to 4, and how we make those decisions along the way. Is that inherent in this proposal from Solar Design, or is that a separate decision that the board will need to make because it has significant financial implications for the town?
So I think it's something the board's going to have to discuss. Quite honestly, the light plant is required to go to town meeting for bonding, and only bonding. Everything else is advisory. And if we're going to own a solar array at the middle school project and a battery, it's probably going to require bond funding to do it, or going through a PPA. Those are the two options. And you guys are going to need to decide financially, since you have a fiduciary responsibility to the ratepayers on how we proceed with that. So that information will be coming. I'm pleased that we have the proposal laid out like we have, and we're able to, start to engage in a contract with them so that we can move to the next steps.
So I just
So
want to make
Dave-
sure that the proposal from Solar Design will include the financial analysis, so we have something to think about, whether it's we own it or whether we do it through a PPA. We'll see the economics of both of those options.
If it's not in SDA's proposal, and to be honest, I've only skimmed through it. I just got it yesterday.
Oh,
Thank
you
that's
for
something
including
that we need to have,
Yeah.
because it is a huge piece of the project.
yeah, thank you.
Pam?
Barry, just laying a foundation briefly, I think that in light of what we've said in the past about our anxieties around all the decisions that we will be needing to make on the middle school, I suggest we think about tasking a person or two on the light board to come up with a template of a decision tree for us that would be available to us. And maybe if there's such a person on the board who's interested in doing that, might be very, very helpful, but that's just I'm just laying a foundation for that kind of an idea. In other words, a subcommittee, a lead in the light board to lay out the critical decision path for us.
And
So I let me just comment on that, Pam. I think the board needs more information around the information that Dave just got the other day. And I think it would be important for Dave to sort of outline in more detail for the whole board what that plan entails and where those key milestones might be. I assume that report has some timelines included in it. And then I think we need to, with Dave's support, identify what are the decisions that we need to make and then how we're going to make those decisions. Because as we've all said, there's financial implications and there's options on the table that we need to decide. So I think Dave is well positioned to understand where we need to make decisions, and we need to understand what those types of decisions are, and then where within this timeline do those decisions need to be made, because there will be funding, obviously, implications. So
I'm not sure I share your optimism, just because we've been trying. I think I still say, just as laying a foundation only, I don't want to get into this now. I'm just saying, I think it may be important for us to, if there's a willing volunteer on the board, to it may assist Dave or be a part of how this board is going to make decisions on these issues over time. So I'm not asking you to do it now. I think we need to see what's going to come in, but I don't want to discount the need for affirmative engagement by some part of the board to help get our critical decision tree moving. That's all. I just want to keep it on the agenda.
And I get it, and I'm hopeful the board is actively engaged in all aspects of that plan.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Brian.
yeah, I just want to make the comment that Alice had mentioned the board's involvement in sizing and scaling the project. I don't believe that's needed. The project is to try to make that property net zero, and the restrictions that already exist on roof space and others will make it more like a 1.2 megawatt array. So I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room in scaling decisions. I think they're going to maximize the solar and storage that can go there. I think this board needs to really talk about how are we going to finance it, and that discussion. So I think we need to talk more about the Article 38 issue about solar in town and policy. I think then Pam's idea of a point person working on that makes a lot of sense. But the middle school as a particular project, I don't think we need to do more than really the financing around that and ensuring that, the maximum amount of solar is going there to achieve that net zero status.
As long as the goal is the net zero status. The presentation that was made to the public showed a schematic drawing that had solar up to 4 megawatts. And so there's space to do additional, including
I don't think it was 4. 4
I believe-
megawatts.
I believe it was 4.
I think it was 1.5.
But the point is, we don't really share the same view as a board, which to me indicates that there isn't a view that we all have on this.
Okay.
This critical
So I think if I can just agree that we're going to have more discussion on the Concord on the middle school project. I think the ask at the time for that feasibility study was just to define the maximum, but then now the project itself has to define what's practical and then to meet the goals, as Alice said, for the building project. So there's going to be a lot more discussion on this. So let's defer this till we have the right time and materials. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I think we're ready to move on to our next agenda item with an update on broadband status. I know Jason was here. There he is, right in front of me. Jason, I assume you're ready to go.
I am. Thank you. So I did provide a written update to the board, and you should see that in your packet. I'll just go through some of the highlights and let everyone know what we've been working on in broadband. So we have been focusing on the backlog, both identifying it and installing new customers. The backlog today sits between 80 and 90 customers, which is a much more doable number, I think, than the few hundred that was thrown out before. We have gone through and confirmed a lot of customers. A lot of people have either moved away or have since, gotten other service, because this was years ago that they had initially applied and we weren't doing installs during the first part of the pandemic. We're also working on a streamlined approach that allows the applicant to schedule the walkthrough immediately after they submit their interest form. Sometimes there's been a little bit of a delay there. And any time that we take away from that process might lead somebody to look into the competition. So we want to keep those people engaged and then also keep them updated and informed on the process and the status of their installation. We've also expanded our use of mapping and GIS so that we can better understand where these customers are and map our service orders. We've also added layers for where police details are required, which allows more of our technicians to schedule work and to sort of group installations so we can save costs and cut down time. Sometimes getting those details can be challenging if they're last minute or if they've already got a lot of other police details throughout town. And we're also pulling more metrics from iView and our billing system to tie into the map so that, again, we can make more strategic decisions on where those installations are. We've also posted the telecom director position, and we've received 14 applications so far. We're about halfway through that process, and it's a good number. And so far, in reviewing them, at first pass, there are several that look promising and seem to have qualifications in this area. So that's encouraging. There's a whole section in the update about network upgrades and updates that we're doing. I just want to highlight some of these. They've been talked about for a while, but I just want to stress that we are really replacing all of the equipment that serves the customers of broadband, from the routers and switches to the power and battery backup systems at the substations. So we are co-locating a lot of equipment and services that previously had relied on the town network and equipment so that there's no reliance on that. And that means that when the town does upgrades or has service maintenance windows, it's not going to impact the broadband customers. There had been previously a concern about the substation not having backup power. So in order to reduce the potential effects of that, we've both expanded the battery backup equipment that we have there to last several hours, and also arranged for a standby generator to be delivered in under an hour if we were to ever have a power issue. And there are two separate circuits that feed that substation, so it would be very unlikely that we'd have a power outage there, but we just want to plan for anything. We've also doubled one of our carriers' bandwidth from 5 gigabits per second to 10 gigabits per second. And the best part is that this was no added cost for broadband. We negotiate these contracts for a few years at a time, and the cost of bandwidth goes down over time. So we were able to negotiate that. We also were able to get a second link from that carrier, which will further enhance our ability to have a redundant system with our switches and routers that we're replacing. In terms of customer installs, we completed 10 in the month of March. Those are new installations. We would have probably done a little bit more, but we had some supply chain issues with 2-strand fiber that we used to actually do that last mile from the splice case to the customer's home. So instead of focusing on some of those, we actually worked on getting fiber to areas that didn't currently have fiber, or doing projects that would allow us to serve more customers. So we did projects on Tanglewood Drive, Barkus Farm Road, Monument Square, and Mill Run that will allow us to serve more customers that didn't have access before. We do have enough 2-strand fiber now. We've got a delivery came in February, and we also have another delivery in the next few months. And we also have more stock coming later this year or early next year. And we're trying to be mindful of the supply chain issues that people are having, and do a good inventory to make sure we have at least a year's worth of equipment on hand, so that we don't have to slow down installations in the future. We're also finalizing a purchase order to have a contractor assist us with pulling the fiber so that we can focus on just the splicing and the installation to the customer's home. I think this will allow us to chew through the backlog a lot faster. In terms of special projects, we had some damaged fiber in December due to rodent chews, and we've made arrangements for a third-party contractor to assist us with replacing that. It was a lot of fiber. Some of the strand counts were 72 or 96, all chewed at the same time, and we spliced and fixed it to serve the customers that had active fiber, but a lot of that is cable that's now exposed, can further degrade due to weather and other situations, and we don't want to have no case on that fiber, so that if a rodent were to come in and try to chew it again, it would be much easier to chew through. So we're going to replace that. It is going to impact the customers who were fixed during that incident. And so by bringing this third-party contractor, we're going to be able to get through the job a lot faster than if we just relied on our in-house technicians. And we've also spent a lot of time identifying everybody who would be impacted, and we'll be doing it in stages so that we can give them a pretty specific window as to when they might see service impacted. And we're going to be scheduling that in off hours so that it won't impact businesses. Before the next meeting, we're going to be reissuing the RFP for Helpdesk Services. As you know, Concord Broadband customers contact a third party that provides tier 1 customer support in terms of troubleshooting technical issues. And we did issue an RFP earlier this year, but we had gotten no responses for that. So we've made some modifications. We've also reached out to our current vendor who is now interested in responding. So we anticipate getting a lot more participation this time around. We've upgraded our network inventory mapping software that allows the technicians to see the network in real time and also soon make changes on their tablets so that when they splice fiber, or sometimes they need to take a fiber that's marked in a certain area and use it for something else. And then the process to date has been making notes on a piece of paper and submitting it, putting it in a pile. And then, when there's a rainy day or something, those are then added to the system. But as you can imagine, if days or weeks or months go by before those adds or changes are noted in the system, then other people who'd go to do an install will expect fiber to be somewhere where it's not. So being able to make these updates in the inventory faster will allow us to better respond to customer issues or do more upgrades and installations. And then we've also been working on our terms and conditions for a while, and I just wanted to outline the process that we see moving forward. It's very common for businesses to update their terms and conditions and just post them on their website. The terms and conditions do state that once they're posted, they sort of take effect. But we would like to be very transparent with the terms and conditions changes that we're proposing. And so we're going to be providing a draft of those available on our website ahead of the next Light Board meeting. And then we'll discuss and highlight the changes that we're proposing. And then they will take effect if there are no comments or suggestions from the board. And then finally, I just wanted to say, I don't want to steal any thunder, but I know the Fiber Completion Task Force is going to be presenting. They did a terrific job. I just want to thank them for their hard work. I was at a lot of their meetings, and they are people who genuinely care about the town and expanding this service to people. And they've put a lot of hours and a lot of hard work into that report. And I look forward to working with them and making some of those recommendations happen. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Jason, once again, you've done a great job sort of proactively addressing many of the issues that have been on the plate. One of the questions I have is, as you engage consultants to help expedite some of the work, are there any concerns financially, given our budget, and are we going over? I mean, we might be spending money the right way, but just wanted to understand if there were any financial impacts.
Right. Obviously, it will cost money to do this, but when we look at the cost benefit of getting new customers, the income stream justifies that one-time expense. Depending on the number of pulls they can do a day, this would only add a few $100s to each installation, which would be paid for in just a few months of getting that new customer. The potential loss of revenue if we delay installations, could be dozens of years of that service. So we feel like that relatively low cost upfront is going to be worth it in the long run, because we do find that if we wait weeks or months to install a customer, they're not going to sit around and wait for us to show up. But if we can get there faster, then they're happy to sign up and support Concord Broadband.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like the right approach. We haven't done a financial update in a while, and I think that's upcoming in a near meeting. So maybe we'll have more discussion at that point in terms of the financial impact. Gordon, I saw your hand raised.
Jason, I was just looking at the your broadband update sheet that you distributed to the board, and that'll end up going out with our minutes whenever they do get published. But I'm super impressed by that effective communication, and just encourage you to think about ways to maybe get that data, that particular sheet out, maybe to everybody, to all ratepayers, and certainly to subscribers of the service. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, we are looking for ways to have more customer engagement and, maybe a newsletter that people can opt into. We want to be mindful of not spamming people, but we also would like to let them know about, maintenance windows service that we're doing on the network and keep them up to date as to what we're doing. So yeah, I agree.
So we've talked in the past about maintaining sort of email notifications and using that kind of a streamlined kind of communication. Is that part of a communication strategy?
Yeah, actually, I've been working with Carol and Donna and the customer service team. There are communication components tied into IView or NISC that we maintain outage email addresses for customers. And so we're looking at spinning up that service so that we can notify people ahead of maintenance windows. We had a maintenance window that went really well during this last month. In terms of actual downtime, was incredibly low to none for most customers, and it was early on a Sunday morning. But later we did have repercussions of that, which I highlighted in the report, with speed slowdowns later in the day until a license was reapplied. But when things like that happen, it would be great to be able to let people know ahead of time. And we did take the steps of notifying people on news and notices and a website and as best we could, but we do have their email addresses in a lot of cases, and if as long as they're willing to receive those updates, it would be great to be able to proactively notify them.
Great. Gordon?
Would it be possible to communicate with broadband customers using Smart Hub?
I'll let Carol or Dave answer that.
Yeah, Gordon, actually, it's a good question, and that's what Jason was referring to. There's a
Okay.
component of Smart Hub called Messenger that does hook into Smart Hub and is based on customer information that's located within Smart Hub to generate any communication events outward.
So you can target this particular outage and be more focused in your communication.
Yep, that will be the plan.
Okay, great. All right, so Jason, thank you very much. The updates are very helpful. Appreciate, again, all the transparency and all the work you're doing. And I just had one question. So the updates that you provided, would you also be posting those on the website someplace or just for customers in general?
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
Okay.
I think that we can look at putting them on the Lightboard too, because they were specifically tailored to Lightboard. But we are working with Carol and her team right now to update the website and focus on marketing in specific ways. So, anything we can do to get more word out so that people know what we're doing, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, great. All right, so let's move on in our agenda. We're a few minutes late, but our next agenda item is to move into our rate discussion. And Dave, I don't know if you want to introduce that or if it's you and Laura probably tag teaming on this one. And materials I know were sent out in advance as well.
Yep. Laura, do you want me to pull up the slide deck?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this particular segment on rates has to do with fixed versus variable collection. And Matt and Dave and I worked to put this presentation together for you. I know some of you are more interested in more detail. Others prefer less detail and more general concept. So it's difficult to put together a presentation that will meet everybody's needs. But this presentation in particular was put together to address questions we've had in the past about specifically which charges are considered fixed and which are considered variable. So there is some detail in here. If you could go to the next slide, Dave. It just wants to repeat itself like Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think you may have to use a scroll bar on the right.
Yeah.
No, even when I do that.
No? Because it's a PDF, it doesn't have individual slides.
Yeah, that's.
Okay.
Well, I could share.
I
Do you want
can
to share the original?
I can, give me 2 seconds.
Okay,
I'll get to that.
so I can start talking
Okay.
before we actually have the slide in front of us.
Okay.
In 2021, CMLP's unaudited electric expenses, including depreciation, but excluding any return on rate base, were $30.6 million. And so in this discussion, we're going to consider, of this 30.6 million, how many of the expenses were fixed in nature, fixed meaning that the expense doesn't change with the amount of electricity delivered.
Okay.
For example, our heat pump rebates that we were talking about earlier in the meeting. We have a fixed amount of money that we intend to rebate to customers who install heat pumps. And whether CMLP delivers 10 million kilowatt hours during the year or 100 million kilowatt hours, that expense is going to remain the same. It's not going to change. Versus other expenses that are directly relatable to how much electricity is delivered. For example, the energy expense component of the cost, how much we pay to the spot market to purchase electricity to deliver to our customers. If we deliver 2 kilowatt hours, it's going to cost twice as much as if we deliver 1. And so how should CMLP collect for these different types of expenses, and how much should each customer class pay are the focus of our discussion. Next slide, please. This may be a little bit busy, and we'll take a moment to explain it. So these acronyms and abbreviations on the left are expense types, and I used the expense types that were defined in our last cost of service study performed in 2019 by a third-party consultant that specializes in this type of work. And so one of the expense types is called CP1. That stands for critical peak 1 hour. And that is those expenses that CMLP incurs based on the amount of electricity that is being delivered during the 1 hour of the year that is the New England system maximum usage hour. So it varies by year. It's typically in the summer in the afternoon during high air conditioning load. But for example, last year, I think it was June, 13th or 27th between 4 and 5 p.m. Okay, that as on a look back basis, the ISO New England grid will tell us that was the hour during which the grid used the most power. And so they're going to charge CMLP for various capacity related fees based on CMLP's usage during that 1 hour. CP12, on the other hand, are fees that are incurred based on the maximum amount of electricity that the local grid uses during each month. So there are 12 of them. So what they'll do is how much was CMLP using between 4 and 5 p.m. on January 3rd? How much were they using between 3 and 4 p.m. on February 9th? Whatever the peak ends up being for each month. So there are 12 of them. And those are generally transmission expenses that are charged in that fashion. Then we have customer related expenses. And those are allocated to customers based on the number of customers in the system at the primary voltage level. There's another one, let's don't bother even talking about it. It's called customer secondary. It's a small amount of money. It's based on customer count at the secondary voltage level. Then there's a basket of expenses that are allocated to customers based on what we call a weighted customer. Rather than each customer being valued as one, generally all residential customers are weighted as 1, but then like medium commercial customers might be weighted as 3 and large commercial customers as 5. And what this is to do is it's for allocating things like accounting and collection expenses, which take more time to do for a large and medium commercial customer than it does for a residential commercial customer based on the complexity of the bills. So it's a way to allocate costs based not on each individual customer, but how much time it takes to process the invoices. Then there are categories that are directly correlatable to a particular rate class. For example, this direct ETS was a small amount of money, but I think we had to replace switches or controlling units just for ETS customers. And there's some direct expenses for hot water heaters and for street lights. Then you see a big expense, about $13 million, that is relatable to energy. Another big number, 4.3, that we're calling expense. It's a blended allocator based on all non-fuel expenses. And we'll see a little bit more about what is included in that number. And then there's something else called non-coincident peak input and non-coincident peak secondary. Input is the input voltage, secondary is the secondary voltage. And the non-coincident peak, unlike the CP1 or CP12, which happen when the entire system peaks during a single hour, the NCP is based on when each individual customer peaks during whatever hour they use their most energy. And in general, you're allocating local distribution costs according to the non-coincident peak, and you're allocating grid-related transmission costs at the CP12 level. As we go through some examples, I think it might become a little bit more clear. So we start with the first category, which represents almost $5 million worth of expenses for CMLP. The majority of cost in this category are the capacity fees assessed by the ISO New England grid, which are referred to as spot market, FCM, or forward capacity market. That's 3.4 million. We then have some pretty significant costs that we pay for our equity share in the Braintree Watson fossil fuel facility that supplies us with a significant amount of capacity. There are then some other smaller costs, both positive and negative, that contribute to this total. Next slide. On the CP12, as I said, it's mostly transmission. And again, the lion's share is the transmission expense that the ISO New England grid assesses to CMLP based on those maximum 12 peaks that happen during the year. That's 4.2 million. We then have some smaller transmission expenses, such as for our ownership share in the PASNY or NYPA, the New York Power Authority hydro facility. We buy very inexpensive power from that hydro facility in New York, but then we have to transport or transmit that electricity across New York to the New England grid, and there's some expenses associated with that. So that's 4.5 million. Under customer expenses, which are being allocated according to according to the number of customers that we have. We have the CARES expense that we talked about earlier. CARES is a bucket that includes a lot of our rebate programs. That would be such as the heat pump rebates. And Jan can go into more detail if people have questions about what other items are included in CARES. We have some customer education and informational expenses, some electric vehicle rebate programs. There's a portion of the fee that we pay to Energy New England each year to perform a number of services for us. Part of it is allocated according to customer count. The other part is allocated according to energy quantity deliveries. And in each one of these expense categories, there's going to be a component called NBV, or net book value. And I'd like to ask Matt to explain, if possible, what exactly that means.
Hi. So in a few slides, you're going to see a lot of line items that look like capital asset categories. That is actually the depreciation expense related to those categories. And the NBV, what that is we had some general capital asset categories that we weren't quite sure how to categorize. So we took the depreciation expense and kind of spread it across the other categories based on the other costs, the proportional of the other costs. An example of those assets are like the building, the admin building, and the trucks and vehicles. So I hope that makes sense.
So it
Okay.
sounds like, Matt, can you just clarify that? It's just confusing. So it's really, you've allocated some depreciation cost, and that's what this represents.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, all right.
And when you say you spread it over multiple categories, what do you mean by that? Because, for example, if we buy a truck and we're spreading that over the categories, is it spread over? It's not in the capacity CP1. So what other categories did it get spread over?
I believe it's in all of them. Each category has an NBV line item.
Oh.
And we just essentially spread it across each one because they're not, a truck isn't attributable to any particular category. So I'm sure there's maybe a more systematic way we could have done it, but that was the easiest way.
Do you have the total NBV?
Yes, let me look that up.
And if necessary, what we could do, Matt, is just actually go through the arithmetic, because it's a little bit more, it makes a little bit more sense than what it sounds like right now, that we just sort of slap some expenses around in different categories. There was more methodology and more systematic allocation than what it sounds like. So if you go up a slide, Dave, I think that's down, go up. See, there was an NBV,
Yeah.
C12.
Okay. Each category has an NBV.
Yes.
The total of the NBV is 443,000.
Is that Excel sheet in a shareable format that would be clean enough for people to see how that calculation was done, Matt?
Yes.
So Dave, would you permit him to share?
Yep, just give me a second. Go ahead, Matt.
So right here are the categories that total the 440. Oh, this one says 47. These are the categories that we spread across the other allocators.
And so this net book value allocator, again, was determined by Baker Tilly during our last cost of service study. And this is the same way that they allocated these general costs. The A&G fixed is a blended allocator where you add up all the other allocated costs, the ones that we're going to go through that were CP1, CP12, customer, okay? And so you get a cost per customer category or per rate class based on the sum of all those allocated costs. And there you come up with a total before A&G. Those totals, or subtotals rather, then form the basis of the ratio that's used to allocate the very general expenses like the A&G. So in other words, if the sum of the CP1, CP12, customer, et cetera, added up to $100 for the residential rate class, and the total costs were $1,000, then the residential rate class would be allocated 10% of the A&G costs.
Do you have an actual, did you actually use 10%, or do you have an actual number?
No. It's
This is, you gave an example, but you don't have an actual ratio.
not on this spreadsheet, I don't think.
But in concept, you're just spreading the depreciation based on the expenses.
Yeah, it's almost like spreading overhead.
Right, that's
Yes.
all you're doing here. So I mean,
Yes.
you have to use something, and at least it's a consistent methodology across the classes.
And it was what was used by, Baker Tilly is an expert in doing these things and doing these
Yeah.
cost of service studies and making these allocations. So we're just
Okay.
repeating what had been done before.
Yeah, so I just want to share the one concern I have, which is the capacity, the CP1 and the CP12 and the energy. Those are part of the power supply. And if we want to decouple and we want to do fixed cost recovery, including depreciation, that should be in distribution categories, not in power supply categories, because we want to be able to make the billing system easier where we can offer credit for pass-through costs. And if depreciation is in there, we can't do that without a loss. So thank you for the explanation of what it is. I think it will take a little bit more time to digest that, to really kind of unpack that when it applies to rates.
Okay, so that's fair enough. I don't think we have time in this session to do
Right.
that, but let's put that as a follow-on that we need to do a little
Okay.
better explanation there. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And we're not going to go through all of these, but I wanted to give you an idea. I know, Brian, in particular, you've always wondered like exactly what type of expenses end up in these categories. This is the one that's customer weight. So expenses are allocated according, again, to that weighted customer concept, where the more complicated an invoice is, sort of the more weight that account bears for the cost. And these relate mostly to accounting and collection expenses. There are some distribution facilities costs in here, like underground conduit, et cetera. And I'm not suggesting that we go through a justification for each one of these elements during this meeting. These, again, were the allocations that were used by Baker Tilly. All we did was update the cost to be reflective of 2021. Because when Baker Tilly did their report, they were based on, I think, 2019 expenses or maybe 2020, but things have changed quite a bit. So we updated those for 2021 costs. Next slide. Some more customer weight, things like meter reading, some of the distribution facilities that support those customers, poles, towers, fixtures, et cetera. Okay, energy here, this is where you're going to see the bilateral purchases that CMLP makes annually that amount to about $7 million. The power that we buy from the spot market, which was in this year, was about 1.9 million. Here's where we put the cost of RECs, since they're, per kilowatt hour, they belong in this variable category. There's that NBV energy. Sorry, Brian.
I was going to ask why the pilot is in this category.
I think originally the pilot did have a per kWh component to it. Is that right, Dave? And that may have changed over the years.
Yeah, that it originally did, but it's got a new formula now. So
So maybe we put it in a different category.
Yeah, can you remind us of that formula?
So it's the previous financial audited kilowatt hour sales multiplied by 2.75 mils. And that comes up to the 451,500 in this particular.
So it's still based on sales.
It is.
Right.
It's based on sales now. With that formula I just described previously, it was based on the capital amount the plant was worth, based on the tax rate at the time. And we changed that model because our pilot was getting inflated because of the undergrounding that we do. So it's more stabilized now and more consistent for the town.
Okay, but it does have a component of sales volume.
Right.
Yes.
Which is why it's in here.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So it seems
Right.
appropriate to be in the energy
Right.
category. if
I
we-
think so
if
too.
Understanding the formula.
It's variable. Yep.
Okay, next slide. All right, here's those general expenses. And what's included in here are salaries, other employee benefits, sick leave, holiday, some of the transfers that CMLP makes to the town. Those costs are in general expenses, and then interest on bonds and notes also included in this category. Continued list of expenses, maintenance of the facility that we're in, payments to outside parties for things like legal services and technical engineering, property insurance, other expenses that don't lend themselves to other categories are included in general expense.
A quick question on this category. It has a 65% weighting. And I'm wondering, these expenses seem to be very basic to having a light plant. And so how did you determine that 65% of this should come from residents versus a 50-50 split for the rate classes?
Okay, you're on the next slide already, aren't you, Brian?
I've already gone through the whole thing. I love this. This is great.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yeah, thank you for this, Laura. It's very good.
Yeah,
Okay, if we can go on, Brian.
yeah, we can go on.
You're a little ahead of the class. NCP, but these again are mostly distribution facilities that were put up and are maintained to serve a customer's maximum load whenever that occurs. So in other words, the size of a transformer that is, let's use as an example, Brian, that is in place to serve Brian's load. He's got a couple Teslas, he's got solar, he's got a bunch of other stuff. Okay, we've got some big facilities there. I think it's 400 amps to serve him. Okay, he probably doesn't use very much energy at all during either the annual coincident peak or the monthly transmission peaks, because he knows when they occur and he purposely doesn't charge his cars then. So he shouldn't pay a big portion of the expenses that are relatable to those peaks. However, somebody's got to maintain the poles and wires that serves his local 400 amp service, and that we can charge his cars during the night when he's charging them. And those much smaller expenses, are proposed to be allocated according to a customer's maximum usage during the month whenever it occurs, which is what the non-coincident peak means. So these are the types of expenses that would go into that type of a charge. And you can just see it's a lot of distribution equipment, conduit, stations, structures, transformers, that sort of thing. And I think we have another page of it. They're not huge expenses, but they do add up. Okay, now Brian, here we go. And I'm sorry this page is busy, but what we have over on the left are those expense categories we laid out at the beginning, the CP1, CP12, etc. We have the total cost of 30.636 million, how much each expense total was for that category. And then just to the right of that, where it says R1 expense ratios, 49, 41, 78, etc. And Brian's pointing to that 65% that goes to expense. We would have to do a whole nother meeting to explain how those expense ratios are developed. But what I will tell you is that they are based on a customer class's usage during each one of these expense types. So in other words, CP1, the R1 customers were using 49% of the energy during that 1 hour of the year. They used 41% during each of the 12 monthly transmission peaks. They represent 78% of all CMLP customers, which makes sense. They're the largest customer count. However, they're only 69% when you weight the customers, because the R1 customers are only weighted at 1, and the bigger, more complex customers are rated higher. So it would make sense they would be less than the customer percent. They only use 39% of the annual energy. They represent 41% of the non-coincident peak. And again, the expense is the sum of all those other categories, right, reallocated for the general expenses. They weren't responsible for any of the direct expenses, because those get allocated particular customer classes like ETS, hot water heaters, streetlights, etc. So this page, what this tries to do, and this is the meat of what we're trying to present here today, is it says, okay, we had this $30.6 million of total expenses. They were made up of different types of expenses. For the R1 rate class, and again, this is according to the Baker-Tilly methodology, this is how much of that total expense the R1 rate class is responsible for paying. And then over to the right here, under fixed variable demand, is what we're proposing, or I'm suggesting, makes sense on how we would charge an R1 customer to collect for the expense. So for what I'm calling fixed expenses, like the customer weight, the NCP input, and the expense, we would charge. So for example, customer, we saw the 944,281. If you multiplied that by 78%, you get 740,978. And we're saying that seems appropriate to collect from a customer via a fixed customer charge per month. And the weighted customer the same, the NCP input, which I'll talk about, there is another way to collect for that, but for the moment I'm suggesting fixed, and the expense. So you're coming up with a total of almost $5 million per year that would need to be collected from R1 customers through a fixed charge. This 77,572 represents the number of bills to R1 customers in a year. It's roughly 6,000 or 7,000 a month. So if you divide 4.976 by 77,572, you would get $64.15 in a monthly fixed customer charge. Okay. Under variable, we're going to put all the energy expenses. So you take the 13 million multiplied by the R1 percentage of 39%. We need to collect 5.094 million from the R1 rate class per year. They use 69,725,000 kilowatt hours. And so that represents a 7.3 cents per kilowatt hour energy charge. Okay. Now what I'm proposing here, and today we only have in our rates fixed and variable charges. If we were to maintain that structure and only have a fixed and variable, we have another $4.286 million that needs to be collected that come from CP1 and CP12 expenses, which would need to be added to the 4.976. Okay, and instead of a $64 monthly customer charge, you'd have something more like $115, which is that 120 that Baker-Tilly talked about in the past. But really, this 4.286 million is attributable to these capacity induced costs. And so if we were to begin charging residential rate customers a capacity charge like we do the medium and large general service, the billing determinants is 20,000 kilowatts during the peak. If we need to collect 4.286 million, it means customers would need to pay 17.76 per kilowatt. Well, what does that mean? For a sample monthly bill, if we were charging according to this fixed variable and demand rate structure, the monthly customer charge would be $64.15. They would be paying 7.3 cents on an average 835 kilowatt hours a month. It'd be another $61 in energy expenses. And the average residential rate customer would use, in this example, 2.1 kilowatts. So they'd have to pay another $37.68 in capacity related expenses for a total of $162. Now, if you did not want to do the capacity related expenses, then you could simply add that 3768 to the 6415. And customers would need to pay about $102 a month in a monthly fixed charge. And $61 in an energy charge. So those are the numbers that you're dealing with. We currently have a $16.80 per month customer charge.
Can I ask a couple questions? So the 14,357,000, that is what the R1 collected under its current structure.
Where are you looking, Brian?
The total.
The total, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the
So
14.3?
Right.
the R1 rate class in the collections using the same data set collected that under our current R1 rate structure.
Yes. Well, in theory, I mean, the 30.63 is a forward-looking number, right?
Okay.
So
But
it's not
if-
what somebody has already collected.
What I'm trying to get to is that if we were to make, say we adopted these changes proposed, the total collected turned out to be the same, the business rate classes would not be affected and the light plant would still collect what it needed to operate.
Revenue neutral, is that what you mean?
Yes, thank you.
That's the
Revenue.
idea, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's just a
Okay.
reallocation of how we're charging.
Yes, yes, which is very important to me. But this is so wonderful. This is the detail I've been looking for, because we've had these discussions about the $30 or $70 fixed charge repetitively. The $35 charge came from looking at the R1's meter fee plus the variable to say how much was collected. It was like 3 million. And then you divide that by the number of customers, you get to about 30. There have been studies that said 70. We have better data now. This is what I'm excited about. The other question I had is on the R1 expense ratios. Those are based on Baker Tilly, and Baker Tilly is basing their data on an Eversource equivalent for behavior. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so when we get our own smart meters deployed more than 10%, we will have our own data to work with, and we'll have those percentages will become more accurate. Is that also correct?
Yeah.
That is also correct. Keep in mind that the meters would need to be deployed for a period of time, preferably a year, before you could rely on that data.
Yeah, but we're going in that good direction. And the third comment I have is you have a column for demand for the CP1 and CP12. I would relabel that TOU for when we have time of use, and we can collect that in more of a bracketed on-peak structure rather than a demand fee that's non-coincident. Does that?
So it could be coincident.
Right.
Yes, so the TO, you could do demand on coincident peak? Is that what I heard?
We will be able to do demand on coincident peak.
Oh, all right. Well, then I'm more open to demand fees if they're coincident. So thank you.
Could I just say, I know there are other questions, but one point I want to make is that, well, first of all, I misspoke when I said it would be $102, because you'd have to take the 4286 153.
Yep.
If you want to have a demand, add it to the 4976 and divide by the 77,572, which would be $119.41. So that's number one. And then number two is the reason I'm proposing a demand fee here and not just sticking with the same structure, which would be $120 per month customer fixed charge and a 7.3 cent variable charge, is because there was a lot of debate when we talked about the tiers about transferring charges from the large users to the small users when we do away with the tiers. And that there was going to be a negative consequence to those low use users. This rate structure is a way to partially address that, because customers who use more will pay up more in demand fee because they'll have a higher kilowatt. They won't be 2.1 kilowatt peaks. They'll be 5 kilowatts or 6 kilowatts. And so this is a way to soften that and to more balance out. But again, it's not completely necessary. It would be a simpler, much simpler rate structure to not have a demand fee, because it is a complex concept for most customers to understand. But the reason we proposed this was, again, to partially address that wealth transfer that would definitely happen if we do away with the tiers. Not wealth transfer, it's a transfer of payments from high use customers to low use customers.
That's great. Thank you, Laura. I want to be mindful of time, and I'm going to try to keep going through these questions. So Gordon, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I've got, thank you, Wendy. And this is a great presentation, Laura. I've got my recent bill in front of me, and just reading from the top, I've got service charge, $16.80, solar, $7. By the way, the solar isn't in this analysis. I'm paying in and I'm not getting credit for that. And if we change the scheme, I'd really ask that you reconsider the extra charge you're laying on to solar owners. The next one is capacity
Brian,
transmission.
Gordon, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
I'm sorry, that's just a side comment. We can keep going. I know that we have not a lot of time. The capacity and transmission is approximately 3.3 cents. The distribution charge is about 5 cents. The energy charge is 7 cents. Now, the variable piece that we're talking about here, where would those get allocated to? Would they go to the capacity and transmission or the distribution charge?
So I just want to point out that this example is for the R1 rate class only. It's not, there's a whole bunch of other ones we'd have to go through, including solar net metering for residential customers and for commercial customers.
Sure.
It's nothing to do with those. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you.
And
my question is,
where would the energy?
Yeah, because there's basically 3 lines on my bill that are volume related, and they're capacity, distribution, and energy. Now, energy clearly is in the variable column.
Right.
And I'm assuming that the fixed will, well, anyway, you tell me, which will this analysis, the 7.073 cents that we're talking about here, the variable column, that is going to replace which lines on my bill?
That would be the energy line. So you said you have capacity, transmission, distribution, and energy.
No. I mean, that's, but currently we're changing costs, right? We're moving them around now, and okay, so
Sounds like transmission and capacity. You're trying to figure out where that lands in this process. So
exactly.
At the demand column.
That's what I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, demand doesn't exist on my bill now. That's a new category.
Right.
So this would be revenue neutral, Gordon.
Right.
So the other categories are going to be reallocated into the other 2 components we're proposing for the new rate structure, which would be fixed and demand.
So basically, in a sense, you could say that the energy charge is going to, okay. I mean, all right, I guess, all right, I guess it's a complete reshuffling. So we, in order to answer your question, I'd have to go back in and dive in and identify the specific charges that are currently grouped under distribution, say, and that probably hits a bunch of these pages. Similarly with capacity and transmission.
So Gordon, this discussion, I believe, is focused on
R1.
proposing a new rate structure. So don't think of it directly as, don't try to relate it to the R1 that exists today. Try to be more open to how do we replace the R1 rather than trying to understand how we modify it, which my opinion is has been one of the problems for the last decade with the board, is we've always used the R1 as a foundation. And I've been pushing to get this kind of detail so that we can rethink that foundation, so that we can make our rates more flexible to the bidirectional nature of the new distribution system.
Okay, so I'm going to have to jump in here. I want to move on with questions. So thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. And I think this is the direction that we're headed to. So, and this isn't the last conversation we're going to have on this. So more discussion is certainly going to be had on all these rates. Alice, you had your hand raised.
I did. So mine's a more general question, not getting down quite to this nitty gritty. I want to acknowledge that we are currently collecting the same amount from our customers. It's just in terms of the customer communications, we are showing them in a different way how we have separated fixed costs from the variable costs. Whether we call it a demand charge, it's already being collected in our rates. And so I think this gets down to a very arcane conversation that most people, I'm going to guess, don't understand their bill well enough to see how we're allocating, and that it's basically for our benefit to understand that the costs of the light plant are covered in something called fixed costs, and they have different names as we go along, and that the most variable costs are those that are related to the direct purchase of energy. And so I just want to make sure we all understand that this is an accounting measure more than it is a revenue generation measure. And it's to make sure that the light plant is fully supported for its fixed costs as we go forward.
Right, and Alice, I'll just add to that. I mean, you're absolutely spot on with that. Just tying this back to our strategy conversation, we had a separate goal of really only getting to $30. And there's been a lot of concern about that, to Brian's point earlier, because what we wanted to understand was the true cost of the fixed cost and what is the right methodology for allocating this. And I think this is an excellent proposal that gets us to a methodology that seems fair. We're just looking at the R1 rate, and there obviously would be a similar model available for all our rate structures. And I don't think, Laura, we're ready to talk about that today, but are we looking for, in concept, agreement that this methodology is sound, is definitely revenue neutral, and it really is just a reallocation of our cost. And this will also align with other rate decisions that we need to make. And we'll have more discussion on the net metering rate. So I think at this point, we want to get agreement that this seems like a good methodology. And what's different here in particular is that demand charge is new. So but it is, again, just a reallocation of costs. So people generally in support of that. I just want to get people's opinion at this point.
That was
Pam's
very
got
well
a thumbs
said.
up.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Brian?
Sorry, quick. So I got to get the acronym right. The NBV being in the energy transmission, or CP1, CP12, and energy. If we could take it out of those categories, then I'm supportive of that idea that you just stated, that this is a good reallocation, because it's just making sure that fixed cost recovery gets out of the CP1, the CP12, and energy is very important, because if we can do that, then when customers share energy, we can credit them that variable or demand without affecting light plant operations. The light plant stays whole. So that's,
Can I ask? Yeah.
Go ahead.
So no, I was just going to ask a question about that. So the NBV, which was allocated to the C1, C2, was allocated there because there was a component of the cost that was variable, if I recall. So can we just restate that and verify that that's true? Because I don't know, Ryan, if it is variable and it's a cost, why we should remove it.
I don't think it was variable.
So I think in the interest of
Allocated.
time and trying to get done what you want to, it would be incumbent upon the light plant to articulate in writing the reason why it has been allocated the way it has. And so if the board reading that reasoning decides that they would like to do otherwise, then we can make those adjustments to the fees. And I mean, agreeing to this today doesn't mean that you have to agree to the allocation of the NBV, I think. I mean, we're not voting on anything, I think,
Right,
right?
right.
You're
No,
trying to
no,
get-
we're not. We're trying to get agreement, education on a proposed rate structure design in a number of different areas, and this is one of the key areas. So I think it's just agreement in principle that this is the direction that we want to go in. And I'm seeing across the board that people are very much in support of this structure. So.
Well, I'm in support of, I feel this advanced the discussion. The
Mhm.
proposed structure, we need more discussion about, but it's great that we've got this granularity.
Gordon?
Just a
Quickly.
couple of comments about adding a demand charge. That could have, it could mean an EV user would be subject to maybe $20 or $30 for ever charging at a high rate anytime in a month. Just saying, it's a fact. That may have we've been trying to support EVs. That would be a little bit less supportive. We may, anyway, just pointing that out. The other thing is, Brian.
No.
So I just want to correct Gordon. So Gordon, that's where we debate the coincident versus non-coincident peak. That's
Okay, well, in that case, it's cool. Yeah, right. All right.
Coincident, great. Non-coincident, not great.
Okay, great. And then the other thing, and this is really arcane, I'm sorry for bringing it up, but wouldn't demand charges be more appropriate coming into the house than going out of the house if you're a solar owner that's not consuming a lot? It's a pretty arcane point, but I would like it if the meters could make that distinction. If it makes sense from a system design point of view.
Won't that be a discussion we take up when we discuss
Right,
the
for
rates for
solar.
solar?
Okay,
net
Right.
so,
solar?
sorry,
I think so.
I'm just mentioning it.
All right, Pam?
Just briefly, I just want to ask that Laura, I think your idea about writing something up on this, anytime you think we need to have elucidation is really helpful. So I just want to make sure that happens, and then I'm very supportive of that. I also want to just articulate the principle of deference, and that is, these are very arcane things. And I think we need to, one of the questions is, do we trust the experts? And I think going forward, having a concept of deference to experts that we trust is very important, because it's easy to get, it becomes almost like a tennis match and it's fun, but there's a point at which you got to get off. And I just hope that we know when we need to get off and defer to the experts. And again, Laura, I hope that you will, anytime you think we should have an elucidation based on questions that have come in, that you provide it, because it's very, very helpful. And I thought this was a great presentation.
Agreed. And Gordon, can I ask you to comment quickly? I'm going to try to take comments from the
Okay.
audience because of this topic, and then I definitely
Yeah.
want us to move on to the next agenda item.
Okay,
So,
super quickly, I think I answered the question that I fumbled a little bit earlier, where I was trying to ask about how it affects the bill. I think that the way it affects the bill is that you move from, I just tallied up all of the volumetric charges on the bill. That's about 20 cents. So we're moving from 20 cents to 7.3 cents.
yep, that's the implications. We're reallocating more
So,
fixed. So
I
can
wanna
we,
make-
you know what, I think we're going to
One
need
quick
to
request.
cut
I-
off
I-
this discussion
I have to make one request.
very
which is just-
quickly.
Yeah, can you share an Excel version of this with the board?
And I guess, Laura, will there be, the other side is the other ratepayers and what that allocation would be? It's probably something ultimately the board's going to want all of them. So we can move toward that.
Yes.
All right, so I just want to comment, we at 9:05 wanted to move on to the fiber task force, and I want to do that. We also have some time for comments, but because we're talking rates, I'm going to ask and allow Dave Allen and Matt Johnson to speak in just a moment, but I want to, just because I think it's timely that we have these conversations now. So can I ask that Dave Allen share his comments on this topic?
Laura, could you put up, please, that last slide so we have the numbers in front of us? While you're doing that, it is with great pleasure to see this. As Brian has already noted, this has been on the board's agenda for a decade, and you will know I was there has been frustrating beyond saying, and it's such a satisfaction finally to see it. The question I'd like to ask goes, by my understanding anyway, to the very nub of what's up here, what you have deemed a demand charge. It's actually a variable because it's by kilowatt hour, or by kilowatt, excuse me. The bottom line question is, what is the logic? What is the reality that makes that a variable rather than a fixed charge? And while that's coming out, let me notice with great appreciation how you dealt with the problem of impact on the lower volume payer in the process. This at the same time, the reason why this has mattered over a decade is that it fundamentally impacts the policy decisions that the light plant makes. This is not for show or for logical purity. No, this impacts where the light plant goes, the decisions it makes in the years ahead. So deciding whether or not this is actually variable or not is quite fundamental, if I could add.
Briefly,
So
to answer your question, is that okay, Wendy?
yeah, I just want to be quick. Yep.
Yep. So the CP1 and the CP12 are variable in nature because if CMLP uses 20 kilowatts during the coincident peak, the fee is, let's just pull a number out, 20 million. If they use 19 kilowatts, the fee is 19 million. So how much we get charged for those CP1 and those CP12 are variable, as you call it, because it will change with what our maximum demand is, not with how many kilowatt hours we use, but how much we're using during that 1 hour. So that's why it's variable.
So let's take that to the bank and think about it and remain enormously appreciative. Thanks.
Okay, David, thank you very much. Matt, can I just ask you to be quick?
Yeah, sure.
if
All
it's
I
relevant.
wanted to say
Yep.
was that I appreciate that a cost-based model like this is a great foundation for any kind of rate structure, but I don't think that we should stop there. That really you need to align the pricing with the behavioral goals to meet the strategy that CMLP has. And so that may mean that you may end up wanting to further accelerate the demand component, for example, to encourage consumers not to consume during those periods. They start to see, oh, this is going to really hit my bill. And so psychological or behavioral pricing for consumers is a key factor that we shouldn't overlook.
So Matt, that's an excellent point. And I should just note that this is only one of several rate discussions that we're going to have over the course of the remainder of the year. And time of use rate is that behavior action that we're going to also be talking about. So a lot more discussion to become that will address some of that behavior issues as well. And so Pamela, I know you have your hand raised, but I'm going to ask that we hold your comments, and we really need to move on now to the Fiber Task Force report. And so can I turn this over to Mark Howell at this point?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for a great discussion. And I'll try to keep us on time as best I can. The first thing I'd like to do is note that the other members of the Fiber Task Force are here. And I'd like to express my appreciation for their hard work. They are Gordon Brockway, David Hessel, Gail Heyer, and Scott Hopkinson. And I know Scott may have to drop, but we're open and looking forward to hearing your feedback about our report. We have scheduled a public forum for tomorrow evening at 7 p.m., which will be held in the Townhouse hearing room and online via Zoom, so where we hope to get comments from anybody in the public who's doing that. We had hoped that the Public Information Office would be able to publish our draft report on our webpage, and I'm still looking for that to happen. However, I will say that it is attached to the agenda for that public forum. So if anyone who's interested in reading the report who hasn't already got a copy should be able to go to that calendar entry on the town calendar and see it there, and we do encourage you to come. We'll also be holding 2 more public meetings, at least on the next 2 Thursday nights, where we'll be happy to take comments. And so I've just sent a copy of the comments that I'm about to make to the board and staff, so that you know what I'm about to say and can hopefully be able to pay attention without having to scribble notes. We really broke our work down into 3 separate sections. We took a close look at the status of the fiber network. We had suspected there were some equity and coverage issues in that data. And what we found was, while we cover about 120 of the 138 town roads, which represents 86% and sounds like good coverage, when you look at the premises, meaning the addressable units as defined by the master address table, which is also part of the 2020 census data that was submitted by the town, and you remove the open space and some of the things that are, not habitable and not businesses, you come up with 6,131 actual addresses that are served, and out of 8,023, which is 76%. So already we're dropping. When we started to look at multi-dwelling units and multifamily housing, we discovered that only about 50% of those appear to have fiber based on the analysis of the master address table. And when we looked at who doesn't have fiber, or we discovered that of those 24% that don't have fiber, that's 81% of those are the multi-dwelling and multifamily units. So you can see that our fiber distribution is heavily skewed towards those single family homes. And if you happen to be in one of those multi-dwelling units, you really are pretty unlikely to, you've got a 50-50 chance and disproportionately unlikely to be served by our fiber network. So we dug into that a little bit more and felt that, there is some adjustments to the investment model that are potentially useful to do, and we try to look at what some of those things are. One of the key things is that often there's a third party between the subscriber and the light plant who has a say in whether fiber gets installed in that, and often they're being asked to bear some cost for no particular benefit for themselves. And so some adjustments in the investment and alternative approaches to exactly how those are served are probably justified in there. The other large group of unserved premises are what we call the streets without fiber, and doing an analysis of the GIS system. And I really appreciated what Jason had to say about the increased use of the GIS system, because I think those are very complementary activities. There are about 52 sort of geographically identifiable areas where the fiber system wasn't built kind of in the first place. And most of those, or a large number of them, are sort of subdivisions of a certain era. They were built usually in sometime between the 1980s and the early 2000s. We're using a direct buried or a limited conduit system. So they were expensive and difficult for the initial installation. We're recommending a closer look at those, primarily integrating them with the road improvement program where necessary, especially where there's already electrical systems but not fiber, as well as looking at maybe other lower cost fiber construction techniques. So a lot of these are underground areas. Another important aspect of this study was to try to understand the business environment in which broadband is operating and what is going on with it financially, because as soon as you start to talk about a goal of increasing the fiber deployment, you also need to look at how's that going to be paid for. And so there were a couple of things that we really wanted to focus on. One is growth clearly slowed during the pandemic. The pandemic may have been the cause, but the pandemic also may not have been the cause. And again, I appreciated Jason's report earlier. I think that some of the things like how fast can you get an installation done, and the focus on improving that will certainly help with the capture of customers. The take rate today, meaning the number of customers that are served by the network compared to the numbers that could possibly be served, is about 25%. That is, I guess we saw about 1,550 or 60 customers now. That was 1,525 during September. We do see that as a seasonal number. The average installation rates in the 3 years prior to the pandemic was about 195 per year, whereas during the pandemic it dropped to, I think, 71 the first year and 90 the second year. So we saw a very significant drop off. For reference, I think Comcast has about 4,500 subscribers in Concord, so we're running at about a third of that level. The total contract value of a new subscription could easily be in the $16,000 range. The expenses associated with getting a new subscriber on the network, the investment by the light plan, has been well under $2,000. So we think that a bit more of an investment in marketing and ensuring that installation services and expense, appears justified, and some relaxation of that could be undertaken. Strategic planning for competition. There are new competitors that have entered the market even since 2013 when we first thought about it. And the landscape is changing, and it's important to recognize that. So we're recommending that some strategic planning be done on a fairly regular basis to try to address that piece. In terms of our actual recommendations, they kind of boil down to three particular areas. One is, we do think that universal access is an important goal. We think that having all premises served by fiber, that in enabling anybody that wants to get the fiber service to be able to get the fiber service is important. We think it also aligns with other goals around sustainability. We think that affordable housing is one particular area where we should be investing. We should just make sure that the fiber is in affordable housing units, so that if we were to offer something like the Affordable Connectivity, also known as Internet Essentials program, to the community, people who live in those situations would be able to get it. Right now, they would be inhibited because probably the unit they live in isn't served by the fiber, and therefore it makes essentially no sense to try to offer a program which doesn't actually reach the people that it's meant to serve. So we think there's some opportunity there, and obviously some investment that could be done. Managing the business is important. We devote a considerable amount of time to metrics under which the business can be managed, and certainly some of the conversations we've had with participation from Jason suggest that they're open to running the business in that way. We think the light board is the correct place for those metrics to be, regularly reviewed and made public in this forum, and we look forward to that. We do see that there are opportunities for additional sources of funding. We particularly want to make the case for ARPA recovery funds based on lost revenue from the reduction in installations that we saw over the past 2 years. We think that has a pretty significant overhang in terms of the resources that may potentially be available to support additional fiber construction in the near term. We also note that 2 additional drags on the finances of the broadband business are the payment in lieu of franchise, which was implemented a couple of years ago to support MMN. While we're very supportive of MMN, we, $20,000 without any real way to recover that going out the door annually means that somebody's not getting fiber in the near future. MMN's finances are quite strong, and broadband's finances may or may not be as strong as we've like to think they are, especially when you look into exactly what the debt status of broadband is at the moment. We noticed that the original borrowing for broadband was paid back on a very accelerated schedule. The million that was authorized by town meeting in 2013 has really been paid back already, which is exceptionally fast, but it's been replaced by a $1.9 million of cash debt to the light plant. So that, needs to be sorted a little bit more carefully before any specific allocation to further fiber construction can be made, and we'll be looking at that. So some of the opportunities that we see coming up are tighter coordination with the roads improvement program would be necessary to address some of those 52 areas that I mentioned. Dedicated allocation from a broadband capital plan for fiber construction really makes sense and should be part of the plan, and affordable housing enablement. Drags are the slow subscriber growth, so paying careful attention to whether that recovers to pre-pandemic levels is going to be really necessary, and I appreciate the focus on that Jason's clearly already making. And those two drags on the operating budget, the pile-up payments and the repayment schedule for the startup loan from the light fund are very important. So if you have any additional comments or questions, we'd be happy to take them at this time. And again, 7 p.m. tomorrow night at the townhouse is an opportunity for a much more detailed look at what's in the report, and we'll be open to questions from yourselves and anybody else in the public. Thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for being so concise in your comments. I know we didn't give you a lot of time, and your team has done an incredible amount of work over the last 9 months, 10 months actually. And so the participation has been really valuable to the board. And I know there's more work to come. And I know that many of the board members probably have not completely synthesize the full report at this point, but what you've highlighted has been very valuable and rings true with many of the concerns that we've discussed in the past. And I think you're raising some good high priority areas for the board to look at going forward. But let me open this up to the board for other feedback. I know, Gordon, you've been living this for weeks now, but other members perhaps have more comments to share at this point.
I want to just say thank you for all the effort into digging into this. I mean, to be honest, I've skimmed the draft report so far. I have not been able to sit down and digest it, but I love the detail that I see there, the number of topics covered and the transparency it brings. I plan to attend that meeting to get myself more up to speed as you're concluding these efforts, so that I can share my ideas and input. I appreciate that.
Great. Great. Gordon?
I'll just say, the task force is very appreciative of the great work that the town has done, that the Concord Broadband Enterprise has done. The fact that we got a request to extend the grid out even further is actually should be viewed. It may seem a little bit like, hey, how come you aren't doing better? But they wouldn't even have been able to ask that if we didn't have as successful a system in place already. And so all we're just trying to do is look and see if we can get this service out to everybody.
Yep. Great. All right, Alice, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I really appreciate that presentation from Mark. I didn't have a chance to review the entire document, which I will do. It came sort of late for me to be able to read the 60 some odd pages. A lot of good work went into it, a lot of good consideration. And I think there are some places in there where the board will have to make some decisions about the investments we are able to support. And I just want to acknowledge that on the list of things that the board is going to have to think about, it is the cost of implementation of the key priority areas identified in this and the cost to our ratepayers.
Yep. Great.
Yeah.
Wendy, can I make a comment?
Yeah, Dave, sure.
So Mark, you had mentioned direct buried in your presentation and alluded to the year 2000. Direct buried stopped at the beginning of the 90s. So
Yeah.
the facts are, it was like 92 was the
Right.
last one that was installed.
Yeah,
And then you mentioned the pandemic may or may not have been the cause of the slowdown. It was the cause of the slowdown. That's a fact.
we understand that there was a suspension of installations during the pandemic. But we also noted in the data that there is a downward trend for installations per year that started prior to that and appears to have accelerated. So our point, and what I was trying to suggest, is that it'll be important as we start to come out and return to normal to understand what that level is. I didn't have time today to talk about the take rate, but understanding what because this is a competitive environment, understanding what the market share that broadband is ultimately likely to achieve is important. For example, if we expected that broadband might achieve a 30% or a 33% market share, that would suggest, given the 6,000 customers that we currently serve, that we'll only ever get to 2,000, which is less than 500 from where we are today. So the question is, how fast do we get there, and is there a logical top? Expanding the network, serving more premises, obviously increases that pool. So we go into some discussion about the total addressable market, if you will, because this is a competitive service. And so people make their choices. And so it's important to understand where that is, because one could invest a lot expecting to grow to a big number and discover that we hit one of these other natural ceilings. And so what we're calling attention to is the need to look at that. I also wanted to mention, just so that we talk about it briefly, in terms of the process, this was the first public draft. We're working to get in comments and suggestions, and do expect to refine and publish a final report. We're targeting, our town meeting warrant was get it done by the next town meeting, which is May 1st. So on or about May 1st, we plan to publish our final report, and we're looking forward to having more dialogue between them. But we are looking to refine some of the points in that, and maybe even expand on some new questions that come up. The last thing I'll mention is I did talk about direct buried, but I also talked about insufficient conduit in some of these. So yes, direct buried ended in the 90s, but not everybody started putting in all the communications conduit that was recommended, for some period of time after that. And so it is of a certain era, and that has fuzzy boundaries. So
I would be clear with that, right?
Yeah.
Those are two different things. So.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they add up to the same result, which is there's not a logical way to install fiber in places that have those problems.
So investments needed. So
yeah,
definitely, Mark, thank you. And I think to your point about the marketplace, it really speaks to your long-term strategy, the planning that's really required to understand sort of what is achievable in the market. So also just comment that for the board members who, and I know all of us are going to read that report, but if we do have comments and suggestions and we're not able to make the meeting tomorrow, that people should send the feedback to you directly, Mark. Is that fair?
Yeah, for the public, if you go to the town's website and find the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force page, there is a button on there where you can submit an email comment, which comes directly to us through the town's website. So that's a way that anybody who has something to say in writing, and we do appreciate in writing because it allows us to distribute it and make sure we don't lose it. But we'll take comments in whatever form we can get them.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it. So I know that we're at 9:29. I am not seeing additional hands raised from board members or members of the audience. Although I do see Pamela Dritt just raised her hand. So Pamela, question, comment, Pamela?
Yes, thank you. I I appreciate your issue about time pressure to create a solar plan like the warrant requires, but and I understand that is hard, but I want to point out the time pressure deadline of the climate crisis and decarbonization of the town as a goal. It's even stronger pressure. We have to electrify everything and green the grid. Guess who gets to be the financial and physical method by which the town does that? Y'all, us, CMLP. We can't wait, and we're making progress, but it has to go faster and we can't pause. And I think the town should give CMLP all the resources, including personnel, that they need to do this important work. I think that consultants tend to only do what is industry standard practice, and we need dedicated people who look for state-of-the-art, non-standard practice for things to developing the kind of distributed smart grid solar local power system that we need. Is maximizing solar a clearing goal of CMLP, not making the middle school net zero, but putting as much solar with battery backup as is possible there, because it should be. It's a waste of money otherwise. Is generating power locally and the creation of a smart grid with distributed power a goal? It must be. Can there be added to the fixed costs? Wonderful presentation that Laura did. The raising money for capital expenses for programs that CMLP is going to need, not just covering the current expenses for things like the fiber, for EV incentives, for heat pump incentives, for building solar installations that we're going to need to do. We need to do that too, not just cover the current costs, but invest, cover the costs of the investments.
All right. Thank you, Pam. I appreciate those comments. You're always our strongest advocate for doing the right thing. So I'm going to ask that we move on in the interest of time to David Allen.
Because Pilaf, the pilot in lieu of franchise, was at least last time. Yes.
Love
Put an A in there instead. I don't know, so multiple consonants. Anyway, was, at least for me, last time prominent and an issue, and certainly has gotten bright attention this time. Just a minute on the topic. What's the franchise fee? Franchise fee is a cost imposed on the franchisee, the price they have to pay for having been granted this monopoly in a town. Kind of obviously, Iman is not in any way a parallel organization to some franchisee that we want to impose a cost on ourselves, be making some payment. We need instead to be asking the question, how do we fund the TV station that we are the inheritors of? That's a much longer discussion, not for now, but I think it's quite clear Pilaf is not the way to go. Thanks, enough.
Thank you, David. Appreciate the feedback. All right, so with those comments, all appreciated. It is 9:34, and I would entertain a motion to bring this meeting to a close.
One quick question, please.
Yeah, quickly.
Will the new meter system be able to run the software for a distributed grid?
I think we'll have to take that offline and respond separately.
Yeah, I have a
to
I have a
that question.
9:30 that I'm late to, Wendy,
Yep.
so.
All right. So I would like to bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, Dave. Sorry. Can I entertain a
moved.
motion to bring the meetings? Who's that? Alice, so
Alice.
close. Alice, is there a second? Brian. All right. So roll call. Alice,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes.
Pam. I think that's a yes. Wendy's a yes. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Sorry that we went over a few minutes, but great conversation. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. All right. Thank you all.
You did a
Bye-bye.
great job on keeping us on target there, on
Thanks.
track.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.